think there are two problems here. One is that there are some things that can be fought on an individual basis, like here's what I can do. But there are other things, and a police state is one of them. It requires institutional coordination. The way you block a police state is you have a Supreme Court ruling that strikes down this nefarious alliance between the government and the digital platforms, often operating, by the way, through intermediaries, nonprofit groups, academics, and so on. The courts need to do that. And then you need, the Republican Congress to do things, and you need attorneys general to do things. I mean, it would send a shockwave through the Democrats if you suddenly had Republican DAs in Texas, in Florida, and elsewhere indicting major figures of the Democratic Party for crimes that are occurring in their state. So legitimate prosecutions. But if none of those occur,
so I want to get into, obviously, police state and what it's about. And yes, it does feel like many of us who have warned about a whole bunch of this kind of, as I said to Ben Shapiro on my live stream this morning, it feels like in some ways like we failed. Like we were yelling about a lot of this, but maybe we didn't do enough to stop some of it, let's say. But before we dive into that fully, I thought maybe we could just talk about just generally what's going on in the world at the moment, because it is a crazy world. And what do you make of sort of where we're at, what's going on, obviously, in the Middle East, what America's role is supposed to be? I'm just tossing a wide one at you. We'll go from there.
I think the attack by Hamas and the fact that it was not only missed by Israeli intelligence, which is something to be examined within Israel, but clearly missed also by U.S. intelligence. And now let's flash back to post 9/11, when many people, I mean me included, were like, listen, there's something that's going on within Islam. You've got this emergence of radical Islam, and it has become militant in a way that we haven't seen before. Maybe it all started with the Khomeini revolution, but you see this militancy within the Shia and Sunni strains of Islam both. Okay, we got to give a lot of these new surveillance powers. We need to collapse some of the old distinctions between intelligence gathering and, let's say, criminal prosecution, because we're not just trying to wait for a crime and then go chase who did it. We're trying to prevent a crime from occurring before it does. But we were warned even then, and this is the case where some of the libertarians, the sort of the Rand Pauls and Ron Pauls of the world, were like, guys, if you give this power to the federal government, they not only can, but they will abuse it.
Right. That sort of gets us to your movie, but we'll...
Right.
Yeah.
So that's one phase of the whole thing. I think that's really interesting. The other phase that interests me as someone who's written about education, about the campus, is how you have these guys who have been delicate flowers on the campus. Don't offend me, don't trigger me, I can't hear an opinion I disagree with, microaggressions, make sure you get my pronouns right. And then when you get a mass attack with all these atrocities, they seem to be politically okay with it. They'll say, well, we're not defending Hamas, we're defending Palestine, but clearly they are okay with, in the name of decolonization and in the name of resistance, they tie their own domestic causes in with the cause of Hamas.
Yeah. Do you see that tie-in and how quickly BLM sort of flipped into what I would argue is really a pro-Hamas movement? The distinction, I can't make that distinction because I don't see anyone on the ground making that distinction, right? At these rallies, you don't see anyone out there going, no, I'm for Palestine, I'm against Hamas. It's not.
No, I mean, look at the BLM could have posted a Palestinian child with big eyes, but they posted the Hamas terrorists coming in on a glider.
So what do you make of how that has now been exported into the United States? And it does seem, we always use the word systemic related to everything. It does seem systemic in that it doesn't seem organic that these protests happened, what some might call an insurrection at the Capitol in the last couple of days, et cetera.
I mean, I've been struck by the fact that the left is a global movement. The right is not a global movement. The right tends to be confined within each country. Now, there are some links that are beginning to emerge because people see the echoes, right? I mean, you had this, quote, insurrection on January 6th. We saw something almost identical in Brazil, right? When you think about COVID restrictions, for example, restrictions on religious liberty, on right to assembly, yes, you saw them in America, but then, hey, they're in Canada. Hey, they're in Australia. They're in New Zealand. They're all over Europe. So suddenly, and I actually raised this in the film, I say, wait, police state, yes, but police planet, maybe? Because now you're beginning to see a global movement pushing kind of in the same direction. I think that also applies to the to the sort of Hamas-BLM alliance, the left here draws energy from similar forces abroad, and vice versa. I don't know if you saw the Hamas leader. He's like talking about George Floyd.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. He said this is our George Floyd moment.
Right.
Do you think we have the right apparatus or the right fortitude to fight this? I mean, it seems like things keep sliding somewhat in the wrong direction. I keep telling people, like, I'm very bullish on the state of Florida. That's where I live. You're in Texas. Obviously, some good things are happening there. But the country as a whole seems very, very wounded, at least with the leadership we have right now and the agencies, etc.
I think there are two problems here. One is that there are some things that can be fought on an individual basis, like here's what I can do. But there are other things, and a police state is one of them. It requires institutional coordination. The way you block a police state is you have a Supreme Court ruling that strikes down this nefarious alliance between the government and the digital platforms, often operating, by the way, through intermediaries, nonprofit groups, academics, and so on. The courts need to do that. And then you need, the Republican Congress to do things, and you need attorneys general to do things. I mean, it would send a shockwave through the Democrats if you suddenly had Republican DAs in Texas, in Florida, and elsewhere indicting major figures of the Democratic Party for crimes that are occurring in their state. So legitimate prosecutions. But if none of those occur...
So what would be a prosecution?
Let's take an example. Yeah. I'm just playing the game the Democrats play. Sure. So for example, Texas. There is open child trafficking going on across the border. The Biden administration is well aware of it. To them, it's a casualty of what they want to achieve, which is they want to bring all these people over here. They know that this empowers cartels. They know that these kids, because a lot of these adults come in with a kid. Here's a dependent child, but it's not their kid. And so the kid goes into basically a child trafficking operation because the child trafficking operations volunteer to, quote, adopt these kids. This is, by the way, all in the movie. And so the Biden administration is, yeah, that's ugly stuff, and we don't intend that, but it's an acceptable consequence of what you're doing. Well, imagine, for example, if the Texas Attorney General, and you can even do this locally, indict Mayorkas or bring an indictment for knowing participation in criminal and illegal sex trafficking and child trafficking.
So it's interesting because it's one of the things that I've been bringing up on the show a lot lately, which is that the Democrats seem so negligent when it comes to the border that it can't be negligence, that it must be intentional. That's basically what you're saying. I think now we're getting into this weird spot with Rashida Tlaib where it's almost like we have an agent in the Democratic Party. How do you blend that, as someone that just made a movie called Police State out this very week, out on locals and in theaters? How do you blend doing the right thing without then becoming part of the police state where you're taking out people who, maybe you disagree with?
No, I mean, I agree. And I don't think that the advice that we should do exactly what they do, because if they do lawless stuff, I'm not saying we should do lawless stuff. But I'm saying that there is something invertebrate about the Republicans and somewhat even the conservatives, which is when you say things like, I can't do what the other side is doing, I'm standing on principle, I'm better than that. This is actually the staple rhetoric of the right of center. That is dependent on a context that I think is no longer our context. So, think of the movie, Jimmy Stewart and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, and he's this very straight-laced lawyer.
Yeah.
And his basic idea is, we have to believe in the law. We don't believe in the law of the jungle, so I'm not going to go get a gun. I have a law book, and if something happens to me, I'm going to call in the authorities, report it to the sheriff. Now, if you're in a small town with a decent sheriff and an infrastructure of that is the way to go. That's the way I want to live. On the other hand, if you take a covered wagon and go out west, and you suddenly realize that outlaws have encircled your ranch and they've got all these long guns, and they want to burn your homestead and rape your wife, take your kids, and if you say, I'm not going to go for my rifle because, I don't want to be like them, and, I'm better than that, I'm a man of principle, I mean, you don't even know what to say to such a person because they have no appreciation of the gravity of the situation and the fact that you're in a combat zone and you need to act, at least start with the psychology of that and then decide how you should respond.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about politics instead of nonstop screaming, check out our politics playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist, all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.